everybody. I'm sorry I'm a couple of minutes late. I have been up working on mobilization since 5 a.m. and I'm really tired, and I still am not out of my gym gear. I got my exercise thing on underneath here, and I'm a little wound tight this morning for a variety of reasons. I'm glad to see you all here. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 23rd of October, 2024. We are in it. 13 days to go, everybody. Mad gratitude to all of you who are out there knocking doors and canvassing and everything else. We have an enormous amount of things to talk about today, including Trump's now revealed routine endorsement of Hitler while he was in the Oval Office. More on that in a minute. But the good news is that we have had an enormous number of court victories in the last 24 hours on issues related to voter protection and accountability. And I'm super excited to talk to all of you about that today. Okay, so first things first, today for our visually challenged viewers, I'm wearing an oatmeal colored sweater over my exercise bra. It's rough and ready around here today, and I have a feeling it's going to be this way for the next 2 weeks. All right, I'm a pink skin, green eyed, dirty blonde haired woman. My hair is pulled back today. I have my thin gold earrings in. I am sitting in front of an oak cabinet, a stack of books, my plants, and I'm coming to you as always from occupied. I'm zooming in a little bit here, guys. Muncie, Lenape, and Mohican land. Thanks for being here. Okay, so we had breaking news yesterday about some interviews that John Kelly had given to the New York Times that then were updated as well in the Atlantic that are nothing short of like a 5-alarm fire kind of situation about Kelly's experience working for Donald Trump. And I am grateful that John Kelly took the time at this moment, 2 weeks before the election, to talk about his experiences. But I will also just say that for anybody who's not paying attention so far, this kind of stuff should sort of scare you. And I don't mean that from the perspective of panic. I mean that I hope that what we learned from John Kelly yesterday will actually move the needle for some people. So just to sum it up, what John Kelly reported was that, first of all, and I have to just say this, we all know John Kelly is not, he's not an impulsive kind of figure. I think that's maybe the understatement of the year or one of them. Obviously a general, someone who was Trump's chief of staff after Reince Priebus stepped down. He described Donald Trump as a fascist, went through in his interviews, word for word, the definition of fascist dictator, and said Trump meets all of these qualities. And it was a very thoughtful discussion, right? He's not tossing around that term out of nowhere. Not that any of us are at this point, although some of us were accused of doing that when we were using that word back in 2016. But I will just tell you that I want everyone to understand that the seriousness of this cannot be lost on anyone who has actually listened to the audio of John Kelly's interviews. And I'll just add that in addition to that, we learned yesterday that Trump, on a regular basis, apparently, talked about his admiration for Hitler, said that he wanted generals like Hitler's generals, which has a little bit of, I don't know, gallows humor attached to it because Hitler's generals tried to kill him, literally conspired to kill him. But what Trump means by that is people who will follow his orders to do abhorrent, amoral, crimes against humanity type stuff. And I think that we've all got to take that very seriously, very, very seriously as we head into the final days of this race. And I will just point out that the Never Trumper side of our large coalition have been extremely vocal about this in the last 24 hours. I've seen a lot of Republicans who are currently voting for Harris, who are out campaigning for Harris, who are high profile former Republicans that people are listening to, amplifying this nonstop. And my assumption about that is that the reason why that is happening is because they know that something this serious could move the needle, perhaps for vets, perhaps for people who believe in a strong United States military, perhaps for people who are remaining World War II vets and their children, right? Like I've said many times here, my grandfather fought in Europe during World War II and would roll over in his grave if he saw where we are right now. So I just want people to understand that there is a critical a critical matter, right, to this information coming out at this time. And very clearly, I think it should be amplified. I'll just say that. I think it should be amplified, and I think people need to be aware of what's happening. And I'll just say this: Newsmax and Fox News are not reporting on this. And so the more that we can do to kind of get people aware of it, so much the better. Now, for someone in the comments who's saying John Kelly should have spoken out a lot sooner, I had that reaction yesterday also. But I will tell you, I got sort of like talked off that by a friend of mine who is, I would call more of a centrist. And basically what that person said was, actually, if Kelly had said this 6 months ago, or we learned this 6 months ago, it would have gotten lost in the noise of the last 6 months of the campaign. And that there's an argument to be made here that talking about it in the last 2 weeks actually brings the totality of the threat that we're facing right to the fore of the conversation. And that's important, that actually there's an argument to be made that the timing here was good. Okay. So, you know, we're all dealing with that breaking news this morning, but I do, as always, want to let you all know some really critical information about really positive legal developments in the last 24 hours, because there were a bunch. And I have to say, like, shout out to Mark Elias and the ACLU, who are doing such good work right now. I mean, I feel like I've been telling you guys forever that, like, we have great lawyers on our side, and they are fighting tooth and nail to protect democracy and protect this election. But the proof is in the pudding. And yesterday we had, let me just see how many we've got here. 1, 2, 3, I say arguably 4 or 5 big court victories that came through. All right, so let's talk about the biggest one. Yesterday, the Georgia Supreme Court rejected in a one-line order a demand from the Republicans to reinstate those insane Georgia Board of Elections rules that people were all up in arms about a couple of weeks ago. The ones that said that there had to be, like, mandatory ballot recounts, and that challenges could be issued, and the Board of Elections had the power to do something other than certify the vote. Okay. All of that is over. This will not be overturned by the Supreme Court. I don't think they're even able to appeal it because it's an issue of Georgia law. All right. They may try, but I don't think that's going to happen. This is again a really big win. The Georgia Board of Elections will have no role as of this moment in the election in Georgia, other than to certify the votes that are turned into them. All right. It's literally a ministerial role. And this is really, really, really good. This was a huge decision yesterday that we should all be really happy about, because I'm going to remind you, the only swing state where Republicans are in charge in the roles that are necessary to count and certify the votes, meaning like certify the vote count. The only swing state where Republicans are in charge of that is Georgia. Everywhere else is Democrats this year, which is amazing. So that is one bit of very good news. Also, the RNC's challenge to the Michigan voter rolls was dismissed yesterday by a federal judge in Michigan. So they were attempting to challenge the way in which the rolls had been reviewed, and they lost. Another huge challenge that protects the voting rolls in Michigan. That judgment came down yesterday as well. Okay, last major election determination, but there's 2 more cases that are relevant to the issue of accountability, was yesterday in Virginia. The Eastern District of Virginia, Alexandria Division, happens to be the place where I did my first federal court argument in 1997 before I had even been sworn into the bar. I'd passed it. And I love this story because that court can be very intimidating. And I was in front of Judge Ellis, who, by the way, was the judge who oversaw the Manafort trial in the Eastern District of Virginia, who is like an old codger, like very difficult to appear in front of, was like almost 30 years ago, definitely still is today. That's where I did my first federal court argument. And it is known as the rocket docket. When people talk about the rocket docket, they are talking about the Eastern District of Virginia, the federal court for the Eastern District of Virginia. So there has been a challenge to Virginia wiping their voter rolls. You all remember that there has been this huge thing underway in Virginia where Virginia officials under Youngkin have been mass wiping the voter rolls, claiming that there are undocumented immigrants who have registered to vote. And an immigration coalition challenged what they were doing in Virginia, because it looks like what they're doing is just like wiping everyone who has a name that may sound Latino. Really, really like creepy, scary stuff. So the Immigration Coalition, along with voting rights activists, challenged what the Republican election commissioner was doing in the state of Virginia, and the Republican Party in Virginia and the election commissioner tried to get that case transferred to the federal district court in Richmond. Now, why would they do that? Well, the federal district court in Richmond is not the rocket docket, which means this all would have been like slow walked until after the election. All right. And Richmond, as many of you may know, if you know anything about the state of Virginia, is south of DC, whereas Alexandria sits right on the border with Washington, DC. It is a very blue area, like super blue, okay? So they were trying to get to a more conservative court that would slow walk the evaluation of the wiping of the voter rolls, and they lost. Yesterday, the Eastern District of Virginia for Alexandria denied this request, which means that the case is going to proceed in front of a judge in the Eastern District of Virginia. And I'm telling you right now, I think we're going to have a ruling on this like that, like super fast. And this, again, is a huge victory for voters in Virginia. I think we're going to end up in a situation where, names are going to have to be restored to the rolls. And I hope we're going to see some redress for this in advance of the election. Again, another huge victory. Okay, two other big things that happened in court yesterday, one of which is just for shits and giggles, really fun. Ooh, sorry, swore. Which is that Rudy Giuliani's assets were put into receivership yesterday because of concerns that he will not be able to fulfill his many millions of adverse judgments against him, not the least of whom are from Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss. So what that means is much like what happened to Donald Trump's corporate company in the state of New York, where all of the companies were put into receivership, where nothing can move in and out of them without approval of the receiver. That is what has exactly happened to Rudy Giuliani. So he now, by the way, may have to transfer his prized collection of Yankees memorabilia. But sometimes karma is just so sweet, like so profoundly tasty. And this is one of those moments. To Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, and that collection alone may be valued at millions of dollars. So Rudy Giuliani is over his head. He's been over his head for a long time, but essentially this means that he cannot transfer any of his assets at this moment. All of his assets will now be controlled by the receiver to make sure that none of them are unlawfully transferred, sold off for pennies, hidden, anything else. And so that the judgments against him will be paid. That was really kind of sweet. Okay. Last big court ruling yesterday is that the U.S. Army, so this is something to watch this week, the U.S. Army records concerning Trump's abhorrent visit to Arlington National Cemetery. You will remember this, where there was like a thumbs up campaign event while he was standing on the graves of dead soldiers, and an Arlington official who tried to get him to stop it then got into kind of like a physical altercation with someone on Trump's team. We think it's Corey Lewandowski, and essentially was like shoved out of the way. And that person then refused to file a complaint because they were afraid of retaliation from Trump's base. The U.S. Army has now been ordered to release the records that they kept about that visit before Friday, this Friday. All right. So again, we're going to get all the details about that from the U.S. Army records sometime between now and the end of the week. And I am just going to tell you that my expectation is that what we're going to learn from those U.S. Army records is that this event was even more ugly than what we already knew. So stay tuned for that. It's not like October isn't already full of so many surprises. But I want to let you all know that yesterday was fundamentally a very, very, very good day on the legal front. And we have a lot of reasons to, at the moment, be very pleased. Okay. There was a request for me to talk about the news yesterday that Judge Eileen Cannon is apparently on the Trump campaign shortlist for the Attorney General position. Okay. Let me just say this. Nothing surprises me any longer about what these people are capable of. Nothing surprises me about Eileen Cannon. That is one reason why, for those of you who have been here for the last 6 to 8 months, you know that I've been telling you over and over and over again to abandon all hope, ye who enter here, when it comes to Judge Cannon, because she is an ideologue and we've known who she is. All right. Now I'm just going to say one thing here though, because I do have to be a slight bit cautious about how we talk about this. All right. There is no proof, no evidence. You all know how I feel about conspiracy theories, all right? That Eileen Cannon has been ruling in Trump's favor in exchange for the attorney general position. All right. There is no connecting evidentiary through line there that shows it. Okay. And I'll ask you all to just consider this. It could be entirely possible that she is a far right wing ideologue ruling for Trump because of her personal beliefs. And then over here, Trump is considering her for the attorney general position, maybe because he likes her for what she's done. All right. There doesn't have to be a bribe. There doesn't have to be a payoff. There doesn't have to be a quid pro quo for all of this to be lining up the way that it is. All right. But I don't think anybody should be surprised. And I will just say this. I think it's critically important, like profoundly important, that we defeat him so that we don't ever have to face down that prospect. Okay. Like that's really where the answer is, right? Yes, I agree it is an appearance of impropriety, but I'm just going to say this. She's already dismissed the case against him, right? We're on appeal to the 11th Circuit. We're going to have to see what happens with that appeal. Jack Smith is fighting to have the case reinstated, and we'll see what happens next. It's not a quid pro quo. Let me just explain this, okay? In order for it to, for instance, be considered bribery, there would have to be an explicit promise. If you just, like literally communications that are documented with evidence, okay? If you dismiss the case against Donald Trump, he will make you the attorney general, okay? People can do lots of things for ideological reasons, though, without needing to be promised anything. And again, because I want people to be mindful that like accusing someone of a crime without evidence can be considered defamation, it's really important to remember that unless and until we see an evidentiary chain that says Judge Cannon dismissed the case against Donald Trump in exchange for a promise to be made the Attorney General of the United States, we should not be speculating if that is what has actually taken place. All right. So keep this all in mind. All right. Yes, it looks bad. Yes, it's kind of galling. Okay. But I'm just going to say one other thing. There's a lot of other things going on right now in relation to Donald Trump that are hella more galling than this. Like her name on a short list is not something that I personally at this moment am going to find myself getting terribly outraged about because, by the way, it's completely predictable. All right. Okay. Speaking of legal developments, there is one yesterday. Oh my Lord, you guys. Again, sometimes I just have these moments where I'm like, these people will try anything. And they have such nerve. It's hard sometimes to find the appropriate words for what they're capable of doing. Okay, so the Trump campaign has filed a complaint with the Federal Election Commission. Let me just tell you essentially how this goes. Okay, somebody on LinkedIn, that's a bad way to start a sentence about anything, right? Somebody on LinkedIn affiliated with the Labour Party of Britain, right? The Labour Party of the UK, called essentially for members of all progressive parties to stand up and support Kamala Harris. The Trump campaign has filed a legal complaint with the FEC claiming that what that is essentially is a call for the Labour Party of Britain to interfere in the US election and essentially is foreign influence over the election to benefit Kamala Harris. Okay, if you're already laughing in your seat, like if you're already having a moment of being like, seriously? Like when we know, for instance, like I know, again, this is one of those things that we've like memory hold totally, but that like there was a whole chain of Russian money flowing through the NRA to Republican candidates, including Trump's campaign since 2016 until like, you know, the NRA was essentially shut down. Like it's just, I mean, I don't even have the words for it. It's hypocrisy. It's stunning. Like they have a lot of nerve, right? I mean, to file a complaint like this because somebody posted something on LinkedIn that was like, all the parties who support progressive values should come together. It's crazy. And, you know, like it will not go anywhere. Like I'm not concerned about this, but you should all be aware, you know, I mean, like I've said this quite a bit here, like quite a bit here over the last year. All right. They are going to throw anything that they can think of at the wall in the hope that it sticks. So just expect that there's going to be like more outrageous developments, legal and otherwise, that they're going to try to find all sorts of ways to imply that the election has been stolen or interfered with, even though most of it is always projection, right? Just like everything else with the MAGA party. But you should just be aware that that's out there and it's happening. Okay, we had a question on the Patreon feed this morning. Reminder, you want to ask me questions, you can become a paid subscriber over at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month. That's less than 20 cents a broadcast. We do appreciate your support of myself and my team. Question over on the Patreon this feed this morning about whether or not we should be worried about Republican early voter turnout. Okay, so here's where this is coming from. Early voter turnout numbers so far are showing an increase in Republican early voter turnout as compared to 2020. And I'm going to remind you all that back in 2020, Trump was telling every person in the Republican Party to vote in person because he was already setting up this claim that vote by mail was biased, that early voting was manipulated. It was the beginning of all of these discussions about like Dominion voting machines and all that other stuff. And so a lot of the Republican base voted in person on election day in 2020. This year, having recognized their error, the Republicans have been like all in on early voting. And Trump himself has even called for mail-in voting, even though everywhere else he's claiming that mail-in voting, is being fraudulently manipulated by illegal immigrants, quote unquote. That is not my terminology. So one of the things that means is that some of the base have been incentivized to vote earlier. That's going to mean, so just sit tight on this, that Republican turnout on election day will be lower. All right. So it's all going to even out in the end, but nobody should be freaking out about the fact that there is higher early voter turnout for Republicans this year than there was in 2020. Because I'm just going to tell you something else, all right? At least from what we are seeing now, and I went and looked at some more of the collected data on this yesterday afternoon, the voter turnout for Democrats continues to be insanely high, like beyond, and particularly from women and particularly from first-time voters. So I am not at this moment concerned, okay? And I'm also just going to point out that the Harris campaign has been incredibly effective at rolling out the red carpet to Republicans who don't want to vote for Donald Trump. Reminder, even the Nikki Haley, voters for Harris are still out there and functioning. And I'm going to remind you all of all those protest votes that went for Nikki Haley, even after she dropped out of the race in the primary season, because there were so many Republicans who were unwilling to vote for Trump. So do not assume that early voter turnout by Republicans is all necessarily for Trump. But also remember that our voter turnout is so high right now, we're breaking records everywhere, that things are looking very good for us. Again, I got to say it every time. Do not get complacent. All gas, no brakes for the next 13 days. It's not over till it's over. We're not going to win it unless we win it. And we have to do everything that we possibly can in order to get the vote out. All right. So don't worry about it and again, even if there was something to worry about, which there isn't, my recommendation would still be the same, which is keep doing the work. Keep doing the work. All right. For the person who's asking, can Biden order that Fox not be turned on in any federal office? No, that's a straightforward, perhaps the most straightforward violation of the First Amendment. The government cannot regulate speech. Okay. Final thing for today that I just want to point out. There has been this ongoing kerfuffle. Again, I keep using the word kerfuffle, which is not the right word, about white male grievance vis-a-vis the Democratic Party that unfortunately continued throughout all of yesterday as well. And I have to say something here, I'm not going to go into the whole debate again. It was a very ugly day yesterday. And this is one of the reasons why I only got 5 hours of sleep last night. But one of the things that I just want to say to everyone is this, okay? One thing that is very clear to me right now is that there is a group, and of course, I'm not going to say everyone because we have so many great white male progressive followers in this audience who I know are out there doing the work. I know you guys are door knocking and canvassing and doing everything right, okay? But I do want to say that there is a group of vocal white men who claim to be progressive and Democrat who are, at the moment, kind of demanding that their own grievances be centered. They're saying things like the Democratic Party hasn't given us our own website, right? Who are saying things like, Kamala Harris should be working to earn our votes. All right. And I just have to say something about this from a kind of like society-wide perspective, because I want everyone to see it through the lens that through which this arises. All right. And I've been thinking about this a lot. I was thinking about it a lot in the middle of the night, because one of the things that I want to point out here is that when we're walking through huge societal moments of change, all right, and demographics are shifting and power is shifting, and at the moment, fingers crossed, knock wood, we're on the verge of electing, for the first time ever in American history, a Black South Asian woman. All three of those are firsts, right? Black woman, South Asian woman, woman, to the presidency of the United States. And my opinion is that a lot of these white guys who are currently bitching and moaning about the Democratic Party not doing enough for them are confronting, somewhere in their own subconscious, the realization that they are no longer going to be as privileged as they once were. And their way of dealing with that is not to go do their own work in their own private spaces with other white cis het men, okay? Not to go do the work that so many of us have done over the last like 5 to 10 years if we are white women, right? Or that so many of us who really have cared about anti-racism and cared about working against misogyny have been doing for generations, right? Only now that it's hip are we seeing some of these guys come to the idea that maybe they should be out there doing voter mobilization work. Okay, but that's another thing. They're not doing that work offline. They're not doing that work in private spaces with other white cis het men where they should be doing it. Instead, they are targeting the Democratic Party because they're uncomfortable and they're not processing it through the lens of white supremacist patriarchy. And I just want everyone to recognize, okay, that part of what is happening right now in relation to this campaign and white men is because of only two things, okay? Patriarchy and white supremacy. All right. And if white men are feeling like they are being neglected or left out, that is the reason why. Because patriarchy and white supremacy have taught them that they are supposed to be the center of the universe. And rather than coping with the reality that they are not the center of the universe, and that they never should have been the center of the universe, and that they sure are not going to be the center of the universe for much longer, given like, you know, the way this country is thankfully changing and what hopefully is about to happen in 13 days as a harbinger of that, right? Rather than coping with their own discomfort with it, they're taking it out on the Democratic Party. And you know, I, along with many others, including Shannon Watts, who I adore, spent a huge chunk of yesterday trying to call this out, call people in, walk them through why it is that they shouldn't be out there doing this. Because by the way, it's not like white men need another reason to walk away from the Democratic Party at a moment where we are trying to elect the first Black South Asian woman as president, right? Like their own internalized misogyny and patriarchy are already going to be up on this. So one of the things that I just want people to be thoughtful about is that those of us who have done this work, which is never ending, right? I just want to say this also, like white women have got to be calling in other white women right now. We've all got to be extremely mindful of our own internalized bias because we were raised in this culture also. But I just have to say this, all right? It is critically important right now that you have conversations with people about why this election matters so much. And if somebody's out there saying, I just don't think I can give a woman the nuclear codes, you need to have a conversation with them about misogyny, okay? If someone's out there saying, I just don't know if I can trust a Black South Asian woman to be president, you need to have conversations with them about why this election is so important. And if there's a white progressive or Democrat guy out there who's saying something like, the Democratic Party has left me behind and there's a spate of loneliness, I want you to point out, okay, that right now, women are bleeding out on hospital room floors because they can't get abortion care, that trans kids are suiciding because they're being targeted for political points by the far right, that legal and undocumented immigrants are under threat in this country, and not just like any random threat, like the threat of purge and mass murder, all right? And that as well, Black Americans, like always, are being relentlessly targeted for police violence, which is an extension, by the way, of like Jim Crow and enslavement. And, you know, I could spend hours talking about this in terms of historical perspective. people's lives are on the line. And the one group who does not have to be afraid of their lives being on the line under a Trump presidency redux are white cis het men. Okay. So at this moment, we need to be incredibly mindful of calling in and speaking to white men who are centering their grievance, because the other thing about this is that it's viral. And this, we've all seen this if you've been following this online. Okay. One of them says one thing that's off and weird and gets called out on it. And a whole bunch of other white men jump in and are like, yeah, dude, high five. Good job. I know what you're talking about. Right. Rather than people stepping in and saying, hey, check yourself for a second. Have some perspective. Look at what's really on the line in this election. Okay. And by the way, the Democratic Party has been doing outreach to white men and white young men and white working class men. And Tim Walz has been on this agenda since the day he got nominated. Right. It's so, so, so important. All right. And that I had to say it today because there were some people who were like, stop getting distracted. This feels like infighting. No, this is the whole enchilada. Okay. The end of white supremacy, the end of patriarchy is one of the things that is writ large across this entire election cycle. And it is incredibly important right now that we talk to the white cis het men in our lives about why they need to vote for Kamala Harris in this election, and that we tell them what's at stake. All right. So that's what I needed to say in terms of a roundup for that. All right. And my hope is that, and I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but between me and Shannon and several others, that these guys have gotten the message that now is not the time. All right. I'm not convinced it will ever get through because some of these guys just feel like they have the right to talk about this stuff nonstop. Me, my grievance. I'm being left out. I'm so lonely. Right. Go to therapy. Like, do your work on your own time. Leave the Democratic Party out of it. All right. And I have to say, of course, I know that we have like lots of great white cis het men in this audience who are doing the work. Okay. Final thing I want to say about this today, because it matters. This morning, this is one reason why I'm not like in my work clothes yet. I was on the phone as early as like 5:15 this morning with people who are doing mobilization work in other states. And one of the things that keeps coming through in everybody that I'm talking to that is out there in the ground game, and I'm talking to people who are like volunteer organizers for specific parts of the campaign or local campaigns or campaigns that are for Democrats where there's campaign for multiple candidates happening at the same time, is that there are very few men knocking doors. This came through in every phone conversation that I had this morning, including people who are canvassing in places like California, all right, for critical House races that really matter this time around. And so one of the things that that I just want to say here is that if you are out there canvassing and you are partnered with a man, or you have a son, or you are a guy, right, watching this, and you've got friends who you know support Harris but have not yet done volunteer work, please, in these last 13 days, get those people out knocking doors, all right? Because the one thing I have to say here is that one of the things that makes a difference in terms of how people vote and whether they vote is whether or not they see themselves in others who are behind the ticket. And seeing white cis het men out knocking doors for Kamala Harris is going to convince other white cis het men that they need to vote for her, or that it's worth voting for her. And the ground game really matters right now. Okay. The doors that are getting knocked now in every state where early voting has started and early votes have been counted are only directed to people who have not yet voted. And we're going to need every vote that we can get. So, I talked to one person this morning where unfortunately they've done 9 canvassing shifts yet, and on only one was there a guy. Okay. So like, we need more men showing up to do the actual hard labor of the election right now. It's only 13 days left. Please go to mobilize.us and sign up to do some door knocking if it is within your ability level or your time capacity in the next 13 days. Okay. If you can travel to a swing state to do it, so much the better. But regardless, every single election matters, and we've all got to be on our game between now and November 5th. All right. Lots of love to all of you. I am so tired. I know many of you are also. Like, I woke up this morning and I was like, I really wish the election was tomorrow, because I'm like wiped. But you all are as well. And these final battles are going to be really hard. And I warned you all that the last month of this election was going to be just like an absolute sprint. And I know a lot of us are feeling burnt out and tired. I'm not going to tell anybody not to take a day off. My philosophy on this from an activist burnout standpoint, but I just want to remind you all that like, this is the final push. And And we've all got to be on our game, and we've got to be prepared that there's going to be so much nonsense coming from the other side from a disinformation and a mobilization standpoint. There is some good news, which is that Trump's ground game has apparently been completely screwed by a data issue where people in their ground game have figured out how to make it look like they've knocked doors they haven't knocked. And this is, for instance, impacting what really might be happening on the ground, for instance, in places like Arizona for the Trump campaign. So we're way ahead of them on that. But please, 13 days, people, we got to leave it all on the field. All right, that's it. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will talk to you very, very soon. All right, lots of love. Bye.